Bonjour à tous and welcome to this video on omitting pas from negatives in French, also known as the ne littéraire. Now you might already know that in spoken French we can remove the ne from a negative to make it less formal. So for example, instead of saying je ne sais pas for I don't know, you can just say je sais pas. And similarly, instead of il ne m'a pas aidé, he didn't help me, you can say il m'a pas aidé. And this is so common in spoken French that it's almost weird not to do it. So if you do want your French to sound that little bit more natural, I do recommend that you do this in informal situations. But what you might not know is that we can remove the pas from a negative to have the opposite effect of making it more formal. Now, because this is a formal thing, it's not something you should be doing all the time. I only really recommend that you do this if you're writing particularly formal texts. But it's important to remember that we can't just do it all the time. Don't take out every pas of every negative, because it doesn't quite work like that. Now, it was a user by the name of littéraire who requested this video, and in their request they've actually provided a few examples which I'm going to use in this video because it pretty much covers all of the cases where we use the ne littéraire. So those examples are: Il ne cesse de me harceler pour savoir quand je vais venir, meaning he doesn't stop harassing me to know when I'm going to come. Je ne peux te le dire maintenant, I can't tell you now. Il ne manque de me rendre visite à chaque fois qu'il vient en France. He doesn't miss the opportunity to visit me each time he comes to France. Il ne pouvait pas s'endormir si je ne l'avais embrassé. He couldn't fall asleep if I didn't kiss him. Si je ne m'abuse and si je ne me trompe, both of which mean if I'm not mistaken. And qui ne rêve de faire un jour le tour du monde? Who doesn't dream of one day travelling the world? So these are some really nice examples, all of which I have put into 4 different categories. The first category is verbs plus infinitives. Now this is not every verb, we are going to look at a list of the verbs that can do this, but generally speaking the pattern is verb plus infinitive. We have si clauses or if statements, rhetorical questions, and then a small group of set expressions. So let's start off by looking at the verbs plus infinitives. Like I said, you can't just do this with every verb that's followed by an infinitive. Generally speaking, it's limited to the following: cesser, meaning to stop or to cease; pouvoir, to be able or can; manquer, to miss; savoir, to know; and oser, to dare. Now, these are the ones that I came up with. In my research, I've also found that you can do the same with daigner, meaning to deign, you know, that really common word, and bouger, meaning to move. But I think you most often see it with the verbs on the left. So the examples that littéraire gave were Il ne cesse de me harceler pour savoir quand je vais venir. Again, that means he doesn't stop harassing me to know when I'm going to come. So you might normally expect there to be a pas after cesse. Il ne cesse pas de me harceler, which of course you can do. That would be a perfectly normal sentence. And removing the pas doesn't actually change the meaning at all, it just makes it more formal. We also have je ne peux te le dire maintenant. Again, you might expect je ne peux pas te le dire maintenant, but here removing the pas makes it more formal. And we also had il ne manque de me rendre visite à chaque fois qu'il vient en France. Again, you might normally say il ne manque pas de me rendre visite, that would be fine, but by removing the pas we make it more formal. I've also added je ne sais quoi faire here using savoir. Again, you might normally say je ne sais pas quoi faire, and that would be perfectly normal. But in a formal text you might instead choose to remove the pas because savoir is followed by the infinitive faire. And then il n'ose me parler, he doesn't dare speak to me. Again, rather than il n'ose pas me parler, which would be normal in the spoken language, in formal written French, we can remove the pas. So again, like I said before, don't try to do this with every verb followed by an infinitive. You don't typically do it with vouloir or devoir or any of those other verbs which are commonly followed by infinitives. By now, it's pretty much limited to these verbs, and I don't recommend that you get creative with it. Only use it with these. So then we have si clauses, basically sentences that start with if. Again, this is not something that you have to do. Removing the pas does not change the meaning, it just makes them more formal. So we had before, il ne pouvait pas s'endormir si je ne l'avais embrassé. So notice that we've not removed the pas from pouvoir here, but we don't have it in the second part of the sentence, si je ne l'avais embrassé. In speech, you might say, si je ne l'avais pas embrassé, but here, the pas has been removed to make it more formal. We then had those two expressions, si je ne m'abuse, si je ne me trompe. To be perfectly honest, these could just be considered set expressions, but the reason we've taken the pas out is because we're using si. And then I've added my own just for fun here, il n'aurait pas su ce que c'était si je ne lui avais dit, meaning he wouldn't have known what it was if I hadn't told him. Again, normally in speech you would say si je ne lui avais pas dit, but removing the pas makes it more formal. We then have rhetorical questions, those questions to which you do not expect a response. So for example, we had qui ne rêve de faire un jour le tour du monde? Who doesn't dream of one day traveling the world, right? I also came up with a couple of my own. Qui ne croit qu'elle est belle? Who doesn't believe that she's beautiful? And qui ne voudrait aller à Bali? Who wouldn't want to go to Bali? Again, in a spoken rhetorical question, including the pas here would be absolutely fine. Qui ne rêve pas de faire un jour le tour du monde? Qui ne croit pas qu'elle est belle? Qui ne voudrait pas aller à Bali? That would be perfectly normal. But if you're writing this in a formal context for whatever reason, removing the pas is perfectly acceptable. And then finally, like I said before, we have a few set expressions where we don't use pas simply because we don't use pas. There is no real reason, right? The first of those is je ne saurais, which literally means I wouldn't know, but most often is better translated to something like I'm afraid I can't. For example, je suis désolé, mais je ne saurais vous aider. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I can't help you. So naturally, because this is a formal expression, removing the pas just makes it more formal and therefore more polite. The pas is also omitted sometimes in the expressions ça fait, il y a, or voilà time que. Now all of these mean the same thing, something along the lines of it's been a certain amount of time since something happened, or something hasn't happened in a certain amount of time. For example, ça fait 2 ans que l'on ne s'est parlé. We haven't spoken in 2 years, or it's been 2 years since we last spoke. Now, I would say that ça fait is the least formal of these three, so personally, I wouldn't actually say this. I would say ça fait 2 ans que l'on ne s'est pas parlé. But with il y a and voilà, both of which are slightly more formal than ça fait, you're more likely to read it. So that's pretty much it for the ne littéraire. Really, there's no new concept to learn. It's really just a case of learning those situations where you can and can't use it. Before we finish though, I would like to quickly talk about the ne expletive, which is very, very similar, but not quite the same. Rather than omitting the pas from a negative, the ne expletive is the addition of a ne where you might not otherwise expect it. The important thing to remember is that a ne expletive does not make a sentence negative. Now you might be thinking to yourself, oh my god, I didn't realize this existed, now I've got to learn about a whole other concept. But don't worry, again, it's really just a case of learning which expressions require it. And to be honest, even then, if you don't include it, it's okay, don't worry. Now there are a few expressions which require a ne expletive, but they're not all that common. So I'm just going to teach you 3 which are sort of common, and you can start with those. So we begin with à moins que, which means unless. So for example, je n'irai pas à moins que tu n'y ailles. So notice we've got that ne there, no pas, but this is not a ne littéraire, it's a ne expletive. Why? I don't know, we just need it. Avant que, meaning before, so rentrons avant que maman ne nous gronde, let's go home before mum tells us off. And finally we have sans que, meaning without, or without somebody doing something. For example, il a fait sans que je ne le sache. So one thing that you might notice here is that all of these expressions also use the subjunctive. We have que tu n'y ailles, ne nous gronde, je ne le sache. Now, I don't think that's a coincidence. A lot of these no expletive expressions also require the subjunctive, so that might be something to think about, but that doesn't mean that every subjunctive expression requires a no expletive. There really is no rule to this anymore. The no expletive is so rare that it's just a case of remembering those expressions where you need it. So there we are, that's it for the no littéraire and the no expletive. Thank you very much for watching this video. Of course, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Remember that this isn't something that you need to do in your everyday French. It's really only there for those who are writing formal French, and even then, if you don't do it, it's not a big deal. Thank you to littéraire for requesting this video, and until next time, à bientôt!